Hi again, everyone. Welcome to the next part of my webinar. Part 2 of learning styles will be on visual learners and auditory learners. In this part of the webinar, we'll be talking a little bit about how you can plan for visual learners and for auditory learners in your distance learning materials and in class. Okay, so let's start. So I'll talk a little bit about different strategies you can use with your DLMs and in class, and then I'll talk a little bit, I'll go into them in a bit more detail after. So let's talk about the first one, which is photo sequencing. So photo sequencing is really good because it can help you present new materials, ideas, and concepts. So the idea is a series of photos that are in an order that help you to in an order that help you to understand things like events or texts or stories. So they're really good for presenting new material and ideas, but they're also really good for as an activity, and it helps students to practice what they've learned and to apply their learning. Images are also really good for visual learners. So it helps students to understand, instructions. They can teach students new vocabulary. They can break up longer blocks of text. So for example, you've got a really long news article or a really long story, and if there's no images in there, some of your students will be lost straight away. So images are helpful to kind of as a guide for reading. They're also a good way to you can also include them in your questions. So having images in your questions helps your students to know exactly what you're asking them to do. Flashcards are also a really good tool for instruction. So they help students to understand and memorize vocabulary, and it can help them to understand complicated ideas and concepts too. So you can definitely include flashcards in your distance learning and in class too. I know in the early years team, they use flashcards a lot for phonics and for learning new words, but they can definitely be used or adapted to older grades too. So diagrams are another great tool for visual learners. Graphic organizers, tables, and charts. These all help you and your students to organize information simply, clearly. Helps them to understand concepts and to make connections between different and related ideas. It helps to introduce new topics, and it's something that you can also use as an activity. So not just introducing or presenting new material, but you can use graphic organizers to, you can ask your students to use graphic organizers to help them process or practice their learning. So for example, if you've read a story in English, you might ask your students to do a character table or a character map, and that helps your students to process what they've learned. Timelines are really good also for understanding how events have occurred and in what order they've occurred. So you can use them for stories, for history, for example, with biographies. So the events in a person's life or in a story. Building blocks and models and even experiments are also really good for visual learners because they help students to see how things work. And you can use all of those in science and maths, but also in English, and in other subjects too. So as I sort of spoke about a little bit before, illustrated reading is so helpful because it helps to break up text. So when there's lots and lots of writing, it could be difficult to read for some students. And you might lose your learners straight away. So your visual learners might switch off completely if they see a big block of text with no images to guide their reading. So do include illustrations and images to help. Drawing is a really good tool for visual learners. You can encourage them to do that in their copy, on a mini whiteboard, or even on the class whiteboard. And the reason drawing is so good for visual learners is it helps them to express their ideas. So presentations and video are also great for introducing new concepts and materials in a fun and engaging way, as are whiteboard games. Brilliant way for students to learn visually and in a fun and competitive way. You should also give your visual learners a lot of time to process or to understand instructions and new concepts. So be patient. If you ask them questions, know that they might take a while to understand what you're asking them to do or what you want from them. So if you see that they're struggling, maybe give them a minute or two and come back to them after. Or you can prepare your students, your visual learners before. Say, for example, Rekha, I'm going to come back to you in 2 minutes and ask you about, I'm going to ask you this question. So have a think and I'll come back to you. Okay, let's look at some examples then of strategies. So flashcards, they're really good for teaching new vocabulary. Here you see some flashcards about autumn season. You can see that it's a great way for students to practice. So you can associate colors to, so you can associate words to image. So you can see red here, and you can clearly see a red leaf. You can also see an acorn here, and you can see the word that's associated. So visual images help understand and memorize new things and meanings, and they also help you to practice. So do include flashcards in your distance learning materials. Students can easily cut them and practice new words. It's a great way to learn new things. Okay, let's look at photo sequencing. So this is a text summary of quite a well-known story called The Tortoise and the Hare. And you can see these images help students to piece together what happens in the story at different times. So it's in the correct order here. And if you include something like this with a written text, so say you've got the tortoise and the hare here, you've got a little summary at the end in images that helps your students who aren't necessarily the strongest readers to have a visual understanding of the story. And they relate this to the words that they see on the page, and ultimately it helps them to learn. With these kind of photo sequencing instructions or materials are really great also for scientific processes like reactions and life cycles, understanding what happens at different stages. It can also be used in subjects like social, to understand important historical events or important historical events. So here we see the same story, the tortoise and the hare, but this is actually a photo sequencing activity. So with this activity, you see the same story again, but it's in the wrong order. So the activity would have students cut out the individual images and paste them in the correct order. And that's a really good way to practice what they've learned and to test their understanding of what's happened in the story. These kinds of activities are really good for English. Okay, here's another photo sequencing activity, and this one is again, a cut and paste or a drawing activity also. You could choose either. And it's about stages of growth. So you can see the different stages of growth here, but they're not in the correct order. So students have to use their thinking skills, look at the images, look at the words, and find the correct order. Again, great in class and also great for distance learning. So this is a visual of a timeline. In this example, it's a short history of cereal, but really you can use this kind of, oh, let me just go back one, sorry. You can use this kind of timeline for a number of things. It can be a series of events, it can be a person's life, it could be even a story that you're learning or a film that you're learning. So quite simply, you've got a line, you've got different dates or times if you like, and then you've got either images or written text showing what happens at each stage. So as I said before, images are really important to help students process information. So if you're giving students instructions or presenting new information, images can really help break up text and catch a student's attention immediately, and it attaches a visual image to words. So here you can see the topic is flowering plants, and you can see a clear image of a flowering plant. The student immediately knows what the topic is and what they're going to be doing in the lesson. Then you've got vocabulary. It's even more important here because it's new. Students haven't learned this before, that you've got new word, you've got an image associated. Yeah, without these visual aids, some learners will find it very difficult to understand important information, and that creates gaps in their knowledge and their learning and makes it more difficult for everyone. Let's move on to diagrams then. So diagrams help, again, understand and learn information. They introduce content, they explain concepts and ideas. Yeah, so students, when you use diagrams for as an activity, they really help students to organize things, to develop important self-study skills. You know, even those students who are really who might even be strong learners, strong readers, they might read something and understand it and think they've got the idea, but might forget. So with diagrams like a table or like a graphic organizer, it helps students to remember and to really create a strong understanding of that knowledge, instead of just, you know, you've read through something and you know what it is. These diagrams really help students to organize their thoughts and organize their learning. So this example is of a table made by Shwetamis in one of her English handouts. So it's explaining the different usage of punctuation, and the table is really good and clear. You've got your punctuation sign in this column, you've got the name of the punctuation, and then you've got really clear examples of how they're used in sentences. With information ordered in this kind of way, it's so much easier for students to process and understand. So using diagrams is really helpful. So you've been looking at graphic organizers with Franny Miss. I hope you've had some time to watch her webinars. If you haven't, please do look at them. And she'll talk about graphic organizers in more detail. So graphic organizers are great for teaching and learning in all subjects. This one here is a simple telling frame, and you can see it's really simple. You've got your topic in the middle, and you've got related ideas surrounding the main topic. Oh, too fast, sorry. Okay, so gone a bit too far again. Right. So this is an example of another graphic organizer, and you can see the main topic, communication, and you've got related ideas. So you've got different modes of communication: talking, social media, newspaper, TV, email, and you've also got images that helps students to understand what we're talking about, what the words mean. And it helps for students to use these. So do provide opportunities for your students to make their own graphic organizers. And you can again do that in class, and you can do it in your distance learning materials. You just need to show a clear example of what a graphic organizer looks like, or a frame for a graphic organizer, and they can fill in the gaps, fill in that information based on the topic. Okay, let's move on to auditory learners. So your auditory learners, well, catering to auditory learners in DLMs is obviously going to be quite difficult because you're not physically interacting with your students. But we'll talk a little bit about auditory learners anyway, so that you can include these ideas in your longer term planning. So auditory learners like lectures and activities. Lectures and listening activities and speaking activities. So you should encourage them to ask questions during instruction time, and even during activities if they need to. Auditory learners are typically really good at speaking and listening. These activities that involve speaking and listening, help them to build understanding, to process ideas and concepts, and it reinforces their learning. It's important when you're instructing or teaching auditory learners that you change your tone and body language to highlight important information, and it keeps learners engaged as well. For auditory learners as well, you could assign them a study buddy, so that they can talk through ideas without too much pressure, and they don't necessarily need to constantly be asking questions. They'll have a study buddy, and if it's the right study buddy, they can work together quite well. You should sit auditory learners near the front of the class. Obviously, their strength is listening, and you should keep them as close to the lecture as possible. Another good strategy is playing relaxing music, and that really helps with concentration. So definitely use relaxing music if you can. Okay, so some more strategies for auditory learners. Class discussions and debates are really good, and listening activities as well. So for class discussions and debates, you can use these in English, you can use them in Nepali, and you can use them in social as well. And to be honest, in science as well. For example, in social, discussing the importance of community work. In English, discussing readings, poetry, or even films that you might be studying. For listening activities, they're really great to develop students' listening skills and for learning new concepts. So you can include those. You can also include speaking and listening assessments. So if you have formal listening and speaking exams or informal assessments for class contribution, it helps you to see if your students are understanding what they're learning, and it gives them the chance to show their learning in their own style. You should also try and include social elements, paired and group work, experiments and projects. So these are the kind of areas that these are the kind of activities that help students to shine, auditory learners to shine. Okay, so some listening activities you can use. So video and worksheets, listening comprehensions, and read alouds, note taking, paired group activities, and interviews. So video and worksheet could be about, you could have a video on or a presentation about the topic you're learning and have students answer questions whilst the video is taking place. You could do the same with a listening comprehension with an audio file, or it could be even using your own voice. And it could even be with classmates, actually, where they have a guided discussion and they have to take notes based on what they talk about. If you choose a topic for your students, you'd have your students discuss it, and then they can feed back to you once they've finished. Read alouds are really good. So silent reading is difficult for readers who aren't too strong. So having a teacher read aloud dramatically is really good for auditory learners. You can also have your strong readers read aloud, and that's also great practice for them. And in silent reading, actually, if you pair your strong readers with your auditory learners, your strong readers can practice their reading and auditory learners can listen, and that benefits both. Taking notes during lectures really focuses auditory learners listening. So what they're listening to, if they're taking notes, they're able to process it and understand what they're learning better. So you can have them take notes. Also, paired and group activities, role plays and interviews, any interaction activity really is great for an auditory learner. You can include interviews as well in your class and in your distance learning materials. So you set a topic to research, and students could ask their family members, their friends, or community members. And you'd have guided questions, and your students would write down the answers they get to those questions. Okay, so thank you for watching this second part of the webinar. I'll be posting part 3, which is about kinesthetic learners and reading, writing learners. So please do have a look at that. Thanks again for watching.